Great to have you on the programme this morning. So you were at the coronation yesterday. Any particular highlights?
I mean, the whole thing. It was an amazing event, and I thought, especially against the backdrop of things not working in our country across the board, great to see so many things that make our country great on display, whether it was the music, the spectacle, the military processions, the fly past, the celebrations of people coming right together across the country. It was just an amazing moment to be there. And also really nice talking to people in the Abbey who had been chosen to attend because of their voluntary service, their community service, their public service, which I thought actually spoke directly to what Justin Welby, the Archbishop of Canterbury, was saying about the theme of the coronation, around service to others, looking out for other people. So really wonderful occasion, and obviously a massive privilege to be there.
Are you a bit of a royalist then?
I am. I think our constitutional monarchy has served us really well, and I think that 300 million people, I think it was, watching right across the world is a good thing for our country, actually. And just reflecting back on some of the royal visits we've had in my borough over the years, anyone who met the late Queen, anyone who's met senior members of the royal family, it's a really special moment, actually, and a way to, I think, recognise and celebrate people in a way that wouldn't quite be the same if we'd had a different system.
You mentioned the late Queen there, who obviously people felt such affection for and an honour towards. What kind of king do you think Charles will be?
I think he'll be a good king. I think we know that he cares about a range of causes, but of course now he's the king, puts some of that to one side, but I think...
Do you think he should put some of that to one side then?
Well, of course he has to, but as a head of state, it's the responsibility of the king or the queen to bring people together. And I think there are ways in which the royal family, on issues of consensus and issues of important national significance or international significance, can bring people together, whether that's on issues like tackling climate change or actually the role of the monarchy as part of Britain's soft power, their diplomatic pulling power. There are lots of ways in which the royal family add enormous value to our country collectively, let alone those special moments of the garden parties and the royal visits.
I want to talk to you a bit about the policing of what happened, because there have been a number of arrests of people protesting the coronation. Now, the Met released a statement. They said, "We understand public concern following arrests made this morning. We police proportionately, and in the context of the event, it's a once-in-a-generation moment. That's been a key consideration." Do you think the police response has been proportionate?
Well, firstly, I'm glad that the police are providing context and recognise the accountability that comes with policing. I think Mark Rowley, the Metropolitan Police Commissioner, knows that there's a lot of work to do to rebuild trust with the Met in particular. So that transparency and that accountability is important. I think it's also important to recognise that in Trafalgar Square, for example, there was a significant Republican protest that took place peacefully, without incident. As you said, I'm someone who supports the monarchy, but I respect people who have a different view and I respect their right to protest. And I think the police does too. There are, of course, some cases that are being raised, probably not important. I don't comment on specific cases while there are potentially still investigations or action ongoing, but that accountability piece is going to be really important to make sure that the policing was proportionate and to make sure that where people have concerns that they're addressed.
I understand, you don't want to talk too much about specifics, but I do want to talk about some of the specifics, because I think it is quite important to give the overall picture. Because, for example, 3 people reportedly arrested volunteers with the Night Stars programme. So that's, Westminster Council's street safety programme, handing out rape alarms. I mean, this kind of thing is quite worrying. As you say, there is concern about policing by consent as it is.
Yeah, and it's that principle that's important, policing by consent. I know Westminster City Council has put out a statement expressing concern and asking for that to be looked into. I think that's an important thing to do. And if the police have been disproportionate or got things wrong, it's important, as we've seen with the Casey review, that they hold their hands up and acknowledge it. I'd also just acknowledge that days like yesterday are really difficult for the police. It's an enormous security operation. There were concerns, I know,
so in regard. They got it right then? That's what I'm trying to get.
I mean, look, the truth is, Sophie, I wasn't there, didn't see, not across the details of specific cases yet. And so I don't think it's appropriate for me to provide a running commentary without all of the facts. I think it's the accountability that's important, and where concerns have been raised, whether that's by Republic, the campaign for an elected head of state, or people more generally just concerned about what they've read in the papers or seen on the telly. So it's important that the police provide that accountability.
In principle, then, anti-monarchy protesters, are they, in your eyes, is it reasonable for them to go along, peacefully protest, but noisily protest, for example?
Yeah, look, if you're a Republican, of course you're going to protest around the coronation. If you're not going to do it around the coronation, when would you? And I don't agree with them, but I absolutely respect their right to protest. And actually, in terms of things that make me proud of our country and our democracy, I think it's the fact that you can have those two events taking place simultaneously, the spectacle in the Abbey, thousands of people packing the Mall, the street parties across the country, and have that space for people to express a different view, to protest. That's one of our strengths as a country. And I think there's one reflection I'd just offer as a politician, actually, reflecting on the divisions in our country, many of them political divisions. We've got to learn the art of being able to disagree well in Britain and to hold different views, strongly hold them, robustly debate them, but to do so in a way that's respectful. And I don't agree with the Republican protesters out yesterday, but I absolutely respect them. I think their point of view is legitimate, and I respect their right to voice their views.
Right, let's talk local elections, shall we? You must be pretty pleased with the result.
Yeah. We are very pleased. The results that we saw right across England, in every corner of England, were encouraging. Important in of themselves, I should say, for those Labour local government leaders who are now going to be able to do things to deliver for their communities, having won power in places like Plymouth and Medway, as well as in the north of England as well. Gains right across the country. I think for the next general election, Labour feels confident but not complacent. And I want to make sure that both of those things are heard because, yes, I think those results do point to enormous progress made under Keir Starmer's leadership. He's changed the Labour Party. Now he's got a hearing to be able to change the country, but there's more to do.
Now, Labour have said that the results show that you're on course for a majority at the next election. And I'll be honest, I don't understand how you've got there, OK? So what the experts are saying is, yes, it's great, but you wouldn't get a majority. And if we look now, I think we can have a look at the House of Commons projection from Rawlings and Thrasher. So these are the experts. And I know you're going to say, look, you can't read across from local elections to general elections. But according to this, you wouldn't be on course for a majority, would you? And this is because you're starting from such a bad place, frankly, at the last election, that you need such an enormous swing to get there. And these results don't put you on course for a majority.
Well, you're right, Sophie. I am going to say that these are, you can't read across, but it is important to say that this is not a prediction for the next general election. This is what would have happened if the local elections had been a general election, and they weren't for a number of reasons.
OK, let me show you another graph then, in that case. I want to show you, these are the council seat graph going back in time historically, and I think we can bring that one up. Because I understand the concerns about the majority projections, the House of Commons projection, but let's have a look at this. This is council seats going back through time. And because you're starting from such a bad place, you would need an even bigger national swing from the Conservatives than in the 1997 landslide. And if you analyse the local elections, you're around 9 to 10 points ahead. But at this point before the 1997 election, Tony Blair was about 14 points ahead in 1996. So you wouldn't get there, would you? It's not showing that you're on course for a majority.
Well, I'd say two things. One is, if you'd told us in 2019 that this is where Labour would be 4 years following that worst defeat since 1935, I don't think anyone would have said that was possible. But Keir Starmer has changed the Labour Party and earned us a hearing with the voters who turned their backs on Labour, and people are turning to Labour again. It's why I say we're not complacent. We know that there is more work to do to earn people's trust and support. But on the basis of the results we saw on Thursday, we are confident that Labour can win a majority. But in terms of our policies for the next general election, in terms of the results that I think we will get at the next general election, the best is yet to come.
Would you be prepared to go into a coalition with the Lib Dems?
We're not even entertaining that prospect, Sophie, because
that's not a direct answer to the question,
I just don't think that is the scenario that we're going to be in after the next general election.
But if it is, which is very possible looking at these results.
I honestly think Keir Starmer could literally be on the way to the palace in the car, having just been summoned to be Prime Minister of a majority party, and the Conservative Party and some parts of the media's talking points would still be, oh, it's a difficult night for the Conservatives, but Labour could have done better. Come on.
I'll give you my word that if that is a scenario that happens, I will not be asking these questions. However, in these scenarios where the results point towards a hung parliament, it is a legitimate question to answer.
No, I think this is a process, not an event. We're not at the final destination yet in terms of the general election.
Ruling it out,
Just give you a couple of examples as to why we shouldn't read the local elections right across. Take Hull, where I say through gritted teeth, the Liberal Democrats did rather well. I heard the Lib Dem leader of Hull Council the other night saying, well, look, locally people have voted Lib Dem, but at the general election, people in this city vote Labour. In Worcester, where again, mildly through gritted teeth, the Greens did rather well. Again, I heard the Greens saying, well, local elections, we fight locally, but the general election, this will be a Labour versus Conservative fight, and I'm confident that we will win Worcester for Labour. But we're not complacent about this, and there's so much more still to come. Keir Starmer's going to be setting out Labour's stall in terms of our big mission to not just cut NHS waiting lists, but build an NHS fit for the future later this month. That will be followed again by a big education opportunity, in terms of educational opportunities, narrowing the gap in life chances between kids from working class backgrounds like mine and more wealthier backgrounds. There's so much more that Labour has in store and so much ambition we have for our country, and that's how we'll win the next general election.
Let's talk about this, shall we? Because if you are going to be the government in waiting, you're going to need some big radical ideas. Last week, Keir Starmer told me that the NHS isn't on its knees, it's on its face. So what's the big radical idea for the NHS? Are you willing to take on the vested interests?
So as well as delivering the biggest expansion of NHS staff in history, funded by abolishing the non-dom tax status, more doctors, more nurses, more NHS staff to bring down...
How much does that raise the non-dom tax status?
Just over £3 billion, and the NHS...
Because if you look at the overall budget, that's kind of... It's not exactly a huge injection of money, is it?
Well, I'd just say, two things on that. Firstly, we know that investment matters. The last Labour government showed that, but so does reform. Again, the last Labour government showed that too. We managed to deliver the lowest waiting lists and the highest patient satisfaction in history in the NHS by that combination of investment and reform. So to your big idea challenge, we have got to shift the focus of healthcare out of the hospital into the community, because if we can fix the front door to the NHS in primary care, where GPs are currently overwhelmed, there are thousands fewer GPs now than there were before. We've got people waiting far too long to see a GP because the GPs we have are desperately overstretched and burned out.
The GPs
if we can get that front door to the NHS fixed, it means faster diagnosis, which means more effective treatment and less expensive, because if you go and see a GP, it costs about 40 quid for an appointment. If you go to accident emergency, it costs about £360. So
GPs aren't convinced by your plans, though, and the BMA have told me that they're not sure that you'll really understand the health service.
Well, we're winning people around, I think it's fair to say, in terms of general practice. I spent a lot of time, not just during the election campaign, but previously, actually out in general practice, talking to GPs and the wide range of staff who work there. I think they get the most important thing, which is we recognise that they're stretched, there aren't enough of them. We need to get the cavalry in to support them. But I think they also see, and I did a big speech at the King's Fund just weeks ago, that if we're serious about having an NHS that's fit for the future, that means having better community health services, faster access to primary care, so that we can do faster diagnosis, more effective and less expensive treatment, which is better for patients and better for the taxpayer.
Should private sector involvement in the NHS be a dirty word?
No, I mean, we're going to have to use the private sector to bring down NHS waiting lists. The last Labour government did that very successfully. That was part of the picture. I think the anger I feel today is that so many people are feeling forced to go private because the NHS is unable to get to them in time. And that's created a two-tier system where those who can pay are seen faster and those who can't are left behind. And that's why I've said, we would use the private sector to bring down NHS waiting lists, because for me, it's not just a pragmatic point, it's a point of principle. Why should someone who's working class or, short of cash be left behind while their next door neighbour is able to be seen faster? But I see that as a measure on the path to making the NHS so good that no one feels forced to go private, because that's what happened under the last Labour government. Use of the private sector fell over the course of that government because the NHS was so good. People said, well, why pay? The NHS is there.
OK, well, if you are Health Secretary after the general election, we'll come back and we'll see if the NHS is...
But honestly, Sophie, people will still be saying, oh, but could Keir Starmer have done better?
Oh, yeah. Well, let's have a see. Let's see. We'll talk about the election results as they come in, as we will do with the government
I'll
as well.
see you there.
Now, with more scrutiny, there's always scrutiny about past pledges, about people changing their minds. And I just want to play you one quick clip of... I think you'll probably know where I'm going with this one, but just have a quick listen.
There's no easy way to say this. We made a pledge, we didn't stick to it, and for that I am sorry. When you've made a mistake...
Now, Labour has ditched its pledge to scrap tuition fees. Are you getting the cameras in for your own sorry video?
Look, I think the important thing is learning from the Liberal Democrats' experience. You don't go into a general election making promises you can't keep. And we're not prepared to do that. And the truth is the public finances are in such a mess that there are lots of things that we would like to do that, in all honesty, we don't think we will be able to afford to do. Now, I think I was talking to you back in the day when I was president of the National Union of Students about some of these issues. I've never supported the tuition fee system the way it is. It's actually become worse, more unfair on students and graduates since I was president of NUS about 15 years ago. And we want a fairer funding system. And that's what Labour will be setting out plans for.
So will you say sorry to those people who voted for Keir Starmer in the leadership election on this pledge that he then broke?
Well, they're Labour Party members, and I think Labour Party members totally understand where we are as a party.
Will you say sorry to people who voted on a false pledge?
No, I think people know that in terms of what Keir Starmer stood to be leader of the Labour Party on, the platform he stood on, making Labour electable again, getting us back to power so we can do things, Labour members absolutely support Keir Starmer in that, and they will understand better than anyone else because they're out there knocking on doors. They were a huge part of achieving those results we saw on Thursday night. They know that more than anything else, it is important that when people pick up Labour's manifesto and they look at our pledges and they look at how they'll pay for them, because it'll be fully costed and fully funded, they know that voters need to know that we can deliver every single one of those pledges. And if Keir is looking at the state of the economy and the public finances of Rachel Reeves and concluding there are things that he would have liked to do but can't afford to do, far better to make those big judgment calls now before a general election than end up apologising after a general election to the British people like Nick Clegg was forced to do. Look what happens to the Lib Dems. We're not going to make those mistakes. We will set out plans for a fairer funding system, though, because I don't think anyone in the Labour Party thinks the status quo we see for students today, where they feel real hardship in their pockets, or graduates who pay their student loans off but still see the bill rising year after year. We know that's not a fair funding system. We'll set out our fully costed, fully funded plans for what we can do on higher education and student finance. But the reassuring point, Labour will not have promises in our manifesto that we can't pay for and keep.
OK, thank you.